Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. Today I'm super excited because I'm going to be showing you guys how to make this no-sew turtle. It is so cute. I love the size of it, and we don't have to make any limbs or anything for this. It's all crocheted in and it's no-sew. So I'm really excited to show you guys how to make this guy, and I'm going to be getting into the materials and everything, but first I just wanted to mention I am currently doing a 10 weeks of tutorials here on the channel, so I'm going to be showing you guys 10 of my favorite market prep products, and some of them are plushies, some of them are not plushies, but they are bestsellers and I absolutely love making them for markets. So I'll be posting a tutorial hopefully every week for the next 10 weeks, and there might be other videos sprinkled in there as well. But I did want to let you guys know that, so make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for even more tutorials. But without further yapping, let's get right into how to make this super cute turtle. Also, I just wanted to say I'm sorry if you can hear the washer or dryer or any other background noise. Yeah, my apartment doesn't have very good soundproofing, so I'll try my best to get rid of that background noise, but sorry if you can hear it. So the first thing you're going to need to make this project are 2 colors of yarn. I'm going to take these out of the frame because there's no space in that frame to keep them here, but I'm going to be using these 2 greens today. I think they're so pretty, but any 2 colors work, and you're going to have 1 color for the shell and then the other color for the body. And I'm using Bernat Blanket yarn. It is a weight 6 bulky, I think, yarn. Any yarn will technically work for this, but I definitely prefer to use this. And if you do switch up the yarn or the yarn weight, make sure to adjust your hook size accordingly. Next up, we're going to be using a 8mm hook for this project. You can also use a 6 with this yarn, but it will come out a little bit smaller. We'll also be using a stitch marker to keep track of our round. And then for this guy, I'm also going to be using 2 16mm safety eyes. On this guy, you might have noticed I used some glittery cute eyes, but I don't have a color I want to use for this green guy, so I'm just going to be using the black. And anything like 16 or even slightly bigger like these ones will work for this project. Next up, we're going to be using some stuffing to stuff the head and the body, and I don't have all of it right here. This is not as much as you will be needing, but I'm just using polyfill. And then the other things we'll be needing to make the turtle are a tapestry needle for sewing up the head and weaving in our ends, and some scissors. Now that we have all our materials, I'm going to go ahead and grab my head color and we'll get started. I think I'm going to be using the darker green color for the head and body of mine. Usually I would go with the lighter color, but I have more of this one, so I think this is what I'm going to use. So to start out my tutorials, I do just like to put a little disclaimer and say majority of them will be beginner friendly tutorials, but they are not intended to teach you how to crochet, so I might quickly go over how to do the stitches, but I'm not going to be doing it super slowed down, super in-depth. It's mainly just to show you guys how to make it and give you the pattern, so hopefully it is beginner friendly enough for you. But if there is a stitch you're not familiar with, or if it's a little too quick, you can go and find videos that will help you freshen up those skills, and then you can come back and make this guy. So the first thing we're going to be doing to make the head is we're going to be doing a magic ring. You can also do the chain 2 method and work into the first chain if that's easier for you. And you do want to make the head first because we will be crocheting it in, so make sure to make the head first. And our first round of the head is going to just be 6 singles into the magic ring. So we're going to go into that ring, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through both of those loops on the hook. And we're going to repeat that 5 more times for a total of 6 single crochets in the magic ring. Also guys, I've noticed that I really don't like when people count their stitches during a tutorial, because if I'm following along with them and I hear them counting and I'm on a different number, it really distracts me. So I won't be counting, hopefully, in this video, although I do sometimes do that naturally, so I'm sorry if I do that, or if you like that, because I'm going to be trying not to. I just tightened up the ring a little bit, but I'm not going to be fully closing it or like knotting it or anything yet, but I do like to close it up a little bit because that can get a little bit harder as we go on. So for round 2 of the head, we are going to be working into that very first stitch, and we're going to be putting a single crochet. And I like to add my stitch marker in the first stitch of the round. You can also do the last stitch, but this works better for me, and this is what I've always done. So I'm going to be putting that stitch marker right there, and then into this same first stitch I'm actually going to be putting one more single crochet. So we're going to be doing an increase, and that is what we're going to repeat all the way around. So we're going to do 6 increases all the way around for a total of 12 stitches in round 2. So I'm going to go into that second stitch and put 2 single crochets, and then I'm going to repeat that all the way around for, again, a total of 12 stitches in round 2. Okay, so once I get to the end of that round, I'm going to remove the stitch marker, and I'm going to start out round 3 by putting 1 single crochet into that very first stitch. Then I'm going to add the stitch marker back in, and for round 3, we're going to be putting, like I said, 1 single in the first stitch, and then in the second stitch, we are going to be putting an increase, so 2 single crochets into the second stitch. And that is what we're going to be repeating all the way around. So 1 single crochet in the third stitch, and then 2 in the fourth for an increase. So we'll be repeating 1 single crochet and then an increase for a total of 18 stitches in round 3. Now you can kind of do this at any time, but I am going to just completely tighten that ring, and I do like to put a couple of knots in it just to secure it. So you can do that if you would like as well. And then we're going to start round 4. So remove that stitch marker, go into that first stitch and make 1 single. For the next 2 rounds, so rounds 4 and 5, we're actually just going to be doing 1 single crochet in every stitch all the way around. So that will be 18 stitches in round 4 and 18 stitches in round 5. So I'm going to go ahead and just put 1 single in each stitch all the way around for the next 2 rounds, and I will come back once I have completed those 2 rounds. So go ahead and do that now, and I will meet you back for round 6. Okay, I just finished up those 2 rounds, so I'm going to take out the stitch marker, and for the start of round 6, I'm going to be putting 1 single crochet into that first stitch, and I'll just add the stitch marker back. And then in the second and third stitches in this round, we are going to be putting a decrease, and I'm going to be doing an invisible decrease, so I'll show you guys how to do that if you're unfamiliar. So you just want to go into the front loop of the very next stitch, so just the front loop, and then you want to just pull up a loop, and then you're going to go right into that next stitch, the front loop only, yarn over and pull up another loop, and then you'll just want to yarn over and pull through all the loops on your hook. And that is how you do an invisible decrease. So that is the pattern we're going to be repeating for this round of the head. So in the next stitch, just put 1 single and then an invisible decrease in the following stitch. And this will leave us with a total of 12 singles in our 6th round. Okay, and we now have our 6th round complete, so before we move on to the 7th and final round, we are going to add the eyes. So I'm going to grab my 16mm eyes, and we're going to be placing the eyes between rounds 3 and 4, 7 to 8 stitches apart. And you'll see how I'm kind of holding my project with the hook to the left side. It's not like crazy crucial that you do this, but I like to kind of line it up so that when I go to stitch up the head, it's going to leave a line going this way with the eyes on either side so that our head is straight when we crochet it in. Hopefully that makes sense, but if it didn't, just trust me. So I'm going to find rounds 3 and 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I'm just going to put the first one in, and then I like to kind of adjust it after I grab the second one. So same thing, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm just going to count and make sure they're around 7 to 8 stitches apart, or whatever you want them to be. I think this is about where I'm happy placing my eyes, so I'm going to now put the backs on. Okay, so now we have our eyes secured, so we're going to move on to the final round. And just so you guys know, I am going to be stuffing as I go in this round, so I'm actually going to add a little bit of stuffing right now, and then every few stitches you might see me adding a little bit more stuffing, because at the end of this round we're only going to have 6 singles, so it might be a little bit tricky to fully stuff the head. So I'm just going to take a little bit of stuffing now and just put it into the head. I like to wait as long as possible to put my stuffing in, just because I feel like it's kind of harder to crochet around once you have that in there. But I'm just going to put a little bit now, and then I'll just add a little more as we go. So I already removed the stitch marker, and in that first and second stitch we are going to be putting an invisible decrease. So just like before, going into those front loops and pulling up loops, and then yarning over and pulling through all 3 of those loops on the hook. I'm going to add in the stitch marker, and that is what we are going to repeat all the way around for this final round of the head. So just put a invisible decrease in every single stitch all the way around for a total of 6 stitches in this round. Okay, I finished the round, so I'm just going to add a little bit more stuffing into the head before I close it up. And once it's all stuffed, we are actually going to remove the stitch marker, and we're going to put 3 single crochets across the back. So working into both of the stitches from the previous round, just kind of like flattening it and going across 3 times. But you want to make sure the eyes are lined up for this portion. So I am going to just kind of line it up looking at it like this, and then turn it. Since we placed them where we did, this is pretty simple, but we're just going to go into those first 2 stitches, so just that first stitch, and then in the back we're also going to be putting our hook through that stitch. And then we're just going to yarn over it and make a single crochet, and then we'll repeat that 2 more times. So working into that next stitch in both the front and the back, and then placing a single, and then 1 more time in those last 2 stitches, placing 1 more single. So that is how you kind of sew up the head or stitch up the head. And now I'm going to be cutting off the yarn, but I'm going to leave quite a long tail, at least longer than you typically would, because I like to stitch the head up at the end just to make it a little more like structured and pointing upwards. That is optional, but I do suggest doing it. So I'm just going to leave a bit of a tail so that we have lots to work with, and I'm going to cut the yarn off. Now that we have our tail and our completed head, we can move on to making the shell. So just put this to the side and grab your shell color. Okay, I grabbed my shell color, and I'm going to start out by making a magic ring. Again, you can use a chain 2 method if you would prefer. My laundry is especially loud right now, so I apologize if you can hear it. But in this first round of the shell, we are going to be placing 8 single crochets into the magic ring. So we're just working into that ring and placing 8 single crochets instead of like 6 like we did for the head. And we're going to be working all the way around until we have 8 stitches. Okay, I now have my 8 stitches, so I'm going to tighten up that ring, but not fully securing it yet. And then I'm going to be working into the very first stitch of round 1 and beginning round 2 by putting 1 single crochet into that stitch. I'm going to insert my stitch marker into that first stitch of the round, and then I'm going to be placing 1 more single into that very first stitch for an increase. And that is what we are going to be repeating all the way around. So putting 2 single crochets into each stitch for a total of 16 stitches all the way around. Okay, I have my round 2 complete now, so I'm just going to finish securing up the magic ring. Again, I like to put some knots in it just to secure it, and removing that stitch marker to begin round 3. And for round 3, we are going to be putting 1 single crochet into the first stitch, and then in the next stitch we are going to be putting a increase, so 2 single crochets in that same stitch. And this is the pattern we will repeat all the way down, all the way around for round 3, and we will be left with 24 stitches in this round. We've now completed round 3, so I'm going to remove that stitch marker and start out round 4 by putting 1 single into that very first stitch. And for round 4, we are going to be doing 2 singles and then an increase. So we have our first single in the first stitch, so you're going to be putting 1 more in the second stitch, and then in the third stitch we're going to be doing an increase, so 2 singles into that same stitch, and repeating that all the way around. So 1 single, and then 2. So we're going to be doing 2 single crochets and then an increase all the way around, and we'll be left with a total of 32 stitches in round 4. Okay, we now have round 4 all complete, so we're going to be moving on to the final round of the shell, which is going to be just putting 1 single crochet all the way around, but we're going to be working into the front loop only. So working into that very first stitch in the front loop only, we're going to be placing 1 single crochet, and then we're repeating that all the way around, 1 single crochet in the front loop only for a total of 32 stitches in round 5. I've now completed all 32 stitches in the front loop only. So to finish off the shell, I'm going to be putting a slip stitch in both loops of that first stitch from the round. This is optional, but I feel like it just makes it look more even and round, so I like to do that. And then I'm going to cut off and leave a short tail. I like to just weave the tail through the body and then tie it together with the other end we're gonna have. So I just leave about that long of a tail, and then I'm just going to cut off. And here is our shell all complete. So now we're going to move on to creating the body and the arms and the legs and finishing this guy up. So to start out the body of the turtle, I'm going to be grabbing back the head color. And when I attach new yarn, I like to do a slip knot. I don't always do it, but sometimes I find that it's a little easier, so I'm just gonna make a slip knot. Take that off my hook, and then we're gonna be working in the back loops only from round 4. So in that very first back loop, it might be a little hard for you to see on my screen, but it's right here. I'm going to be inserting my hook. And once I have my hook in there, I'm going to reattach my slip knot, and then I'm just going to pull that right through the back loop stitch. And then I'm going to be inserting my hook into the very first stitch from round 4. So it's going to be the back loop from the first stitch of round 4. This was the very last stitch we did in round 4. So inserting my hook right into that back loop, and I'm just going to be making 1 single crochet. And you can add your stitch marker in if you'd like, but since it's different colors, I'm going to be able to tell where I started the round, so I'm not going to add it for this round. But for the first round of the body, we're just going to continue putting one single crochet in the back loop only of round 4 from the shell, and we're going to have a total of 32 stitches all the way around. Okay, so I've now made it to the end of the round, but this is important since we technically attached the yarn in the last stitch of round 4, but we didn't make a stitch in it. We only made a stitch in the first stitch of round 4. We are going to place one in that very last stitch of the round as well to create our total of 32. And now that I have like both colors attached, I am going to weave this end of the shell through to the inside of the body. And I pull it through as much as I can, and then once I have it through, I just like to tie these 2 strands together just to secure them in place. And now that we've done that, we can move on to round 2 of the body, and this one is going to be quite in depth, so just follow along and you will be able to do it, hopefully no problem. But there's just a lot of steps because we're going to be making the tail and the 4 legs or arms. So in the very first stitch of this round, we are going to be putting a bobble stitch. And if you want the tail to really stick out, you can also do a front loop only bobble stitch, but I'm just going to be working into both loops of the stitch. So to make a bobble stitch, we yarn over, and then we insert our hook into that very first stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then we yarn over and pull through 2. And we repeat that a few more times until we have a total of 5 loops on the hook, or 4 of these little half made doubles, and then this first loop. So I'm going to repeat it 3 more times. So yarn over, insert into that very same stitch and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through just the first 2. Now we have 3 loops, so 2 more times. And then once we have all 5 of our loops on the hook, we are going to yarn over and pull through all of them. And we now have our bobble, so I'm just going to kind of push it out with my finger. Then I am going to work into the very next stitch and put 1 single crochet. And I like to tighten that quite a bit just so we don't have any holes going on. But there's our tail. And now that we have the tail and our first single in the second stitch, we are going to be putting 2 more singles in the next 2 stitches. So we are going to be doing 1 in this next stitch, and then 1 in the very next stitch for a total of 3 singles after that tail. Now that we have our 3 singles after the tail in that next stitch, we are going to be putting a single crochet but in the front loop only. So going into that front loop and making a single crochet. Now we are going to be working on our first leg. So to make the leg, we are going to chain 5, so yarn over and pull up a loop, and then repeat that for a total of 5. And now that we have our 5 chains, we are going to go into the second chain from our hook. So not this very first one, but the second one, and we're going to insert our hook, and then we're going to be placing a single crochet. Now that we have a single in the first chain, we are going to be putting a half double in the next chain. So yarn over and go into that next chain, pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops on the hook. And then in the third chain, we are going to be doing a double crochet. So we're going to yarn over and go into that next chain, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over and pull through 2. And then in the final chain on this leg, we are going to be putting a half double. So yarn over, go into the stitch and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through all 3 of those stitches. And then to finish off this leg, we are going to be putting a single in the very next stitch in our body, but we're going to be doing a modified single. I like to do this so there's no holes. So to do this, I'm going to work into the first single crochet we made, so you can see the top part of the V right here. I'm going to be working into the actual stitch, so you'll see this kind of diagonal line coming across. So I'm just going to put my hook right into the very center of that stitch, and I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop, and then I'm going to work into the very next stitch of the body, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull through 2. So it's almost like you're doing a decrease, but since the first part didn't count as the actual stitch, it's not going to change our stitch count. But you'll see that there's no sort of hole or anything, so I like to do that. Now that we have that first modified single, we are going to be putting 4 more regular singles into the next 4 stitches. So 1 single into the next 4 stitches. So just working into that next stitch and putting 1 single and repeating that 3 more times for a total of 4. Now that I've done 4 more single crochets, we are going to work on our arm. So it's a little different than the leg part, and to do the arm, we are going to start by doing a single crochet in the front loop only of the next stitch, and then we're going to be making a chain of 6 this time. So yarn over and pull up a loop 6 times, and then we're going to be working into the chain. So again, in the second chain from the hook, not the very first one, we are going to be going into that and making a single crochet. In the next chain, we are going to be making a half double. Into the third, we are going to be making a double. And then the next one, we are going to be doing another double. And then in the final one half double. Now that we finished our arm, we are going to be doing a modified single. So working into that front loop only stitch we made before the arm and pulling up a loop there. And then into the very next stitch of the body, pulling up a loop, and then yarning over and pulling through all 3 of those loops on the hook. So you'll see the arm is slightly larger than the little leg. Now that we have our arm done, we are going to be putting just 3 regular single crochets into the next 3 stitches. So 1 into the next 3 stitches, and once we have that, we are going to be grabbing our turtle's head and we're going to be crocheting the head right in. So to do this, we are just going to place our turtle's head however you want it to sit once it's attached. So I'm going to just kind of see which way I would like it to point, and I think I would rather be like this. So I'm going to start on the end that doesn't have the tail, and I'm going to start out by putting my hook into both loops from that first single crochet stitch we made in the head. And then once I have that, I am going to also put my hook into the next stitch of the body round. So I've got it through the head and then through that next stitch, and then I'm going to yarn over, pull through that body portion, then also pull through that head stitch, and then just yarn over and complete the single. I'm going to repeat that 2 more times in the last 2 stitches of the head and in the next 2 stitches of the body. So start out by going through that next stitch of the head, and then going through the next stitch of the body, pulling your loop through all of those parts, and then making a single. And one more time, work through the head and the body and make a single. Typically, if I was making something like this, I would have hid this into the body on the last stitch, but I actually want to leave the head tail out because I'm going to be using it to kind of sew the head at the end. Okay, and before we made the head, we did 3 singles over here and then that modified one. So in the next part, we are going to be starting out with 3 singles, 1 into the next 30 stitches. And then in the place of that modified single we did, we're going to be putting 1 single in the front loop only. And this is also the start of our second arm. So to make the second arm, we're going to chain 6. And once we have our chain of 6, we're going to be repeating what we did for the very first arm. So we're going to put a single crochet into that second chain from the hook. And then in the very next chain, we're going to be putting a half double. In the next 2 stitches, we're going to be putting a double. And then in the last chain, we're going to be putting a half double. And then as usual, when we finish off our arms or legs, we're going to be doing a modified single. So working into that front loop only stitch and pulling up a loop, and then working into that very next stitch of the body, pulling up a loop, and then pulling through all 3. And then before we do the final leg, we are going to start out by doing 4 single crochets. So 1 into the next 4 stitches. And then to start out our final leg, we are going to start by doing 1 single in the front loop only of the next stitch. And then we are chaining 5 this time because it is a leg. And then to do our final leg, we are going to be starting with a single in the first chain. In the next chain, we're going to be doing a half double. In the third, 1 double crochet. And then in that last chain, 1 half double. To finish off this leg, we're going to be doing a modified single. And then we'll be finishing off this round with 3 single crochets into the next 3 stitches. So 1 into the next 3 stitches. And this will leave us at the very start of the round. Okay, now we have our tail and all of our limbs and our head attached. So we are going to start the 3rd round of the body. And this round is going to start out with 1 single crochet into that first stitch of the round, which is the bobble stitch we made. I am going to put my stitch marker in this time just because we're no longer working with 2 different colors or anything. And then in the next stitch, we're also just going to be putting 1 single crochet. And then to start making our body smaller and closing it up, we are going to be putting a decrease stitch. So it's going to be an invisible decrease, just like we've been doing. And this is what we're going to be repeating all the way around, 2 single crochets and then a decrease, but I'm going to continue working with you guys just to make sure we know how to do the stitches that go right underneath of our arms and legs. So we're working into that very next stitch, which is the front loop only single we did from the last round, and putting 1 single crochet. And then for our second single crochet before the decrease, we're going to fold down our leg and we're going to work into the back loop only that we left for ourselves from the previous round. So you may have to turn your work around to find that back loop and insert your hook right into it. And then we're just going to make a regular single. And then we're going to be working in the modified single from the previous round to start out our decrease. So in the front loop only of that stitch. and then also into the very next stitch to create our decrease. So working into the front loop of that stitch, and then once we have the 3 loops on our hook, yarn over and pull through all of them. And we're going to be repeating that all the way around, so I'll continue doing it with you just to make sure that we're all clear on how to do it. So starting out with our 2 regular single crochets, 1 into the next 2 stitches, and then placing our invisible decrease in the next 2 stitches. Folding down the arm and finding that back loop for the first stitch, and then a second stitch goes right into that modified single, and then placing our invisible decrease in the next 2 stitches, and then for the part that gets close to the head, you're just going to want to fold the head down, and then it will reveal the stitches we made there. So starting out with just 2 single crochets, and then a decrease, two more singles, and then a invisible decrease, fold down the arm and find our back loop only stitch for the first single crochet. The second single crochet goes into that modified single, and then a decrease, and then we're almost there, so putting 1 single into the next 2 stitches, and then placing a decrease, so working into that front loop only single first, pulling up a loop, and then finding our back loop from the previous round and working into that for our second loop, and then yarning over and pulling through all 3. And then our last little sequence of this pattern, we're going to be doing 1 single into that modified single, one more single into the next stitch, and then finishing off round 3 with a invisible decrease. Okay, so we are now done with round 3 of our turtle. It should be looking a little something like this, and we're now going to move on to round 4. So for round 4, I'm going to start by doing a single into the first stitch and adding back my stitch marker, and then I'll be putting a invisible decrease in the next 2 stitches. And this is what we will be repeating all the way around, just in every stitch, a single crochet and then a decrease. I forgot to say the numbers you should have for the last couple rounds, but in the round that we made the tail and the limbs, you'll have 32 stitches again because we didn't do any decreasing. In the following round 3 that we just completed, you will have a total of 24 stitches, and then to end off round 4 of the body, we will have a total of 16 stitches around. And we now have 16 singles around, and for round 5 and the final round of this project, we are going to be putting a decrease in every stitch all the way around for a total of 8 stitches at the end of the round. And you'll notice that for the body portion, I'm not going to be stuffing until I'm done all of the crocheting for the round, just because we have 8 stitches total at the end, so I find that that's a big enough hole for me where it's not super difficult to add the stuffing at that point. But if you would like to stuff before starting round 5 or during round 5, feel free to do that. And before I finish stuffing up the turtle, I'm going to tie off and cut off the yarn. So I'm going to leave just a little bit of a tail just to finish closing this up and securing it. And then I'm going to grab my scissors and cut off. And then I am going to stuff the body. And once we have all of our stuffing in, I'm going to grab my tapestry needle and I'm going to attach it to this strand of yarn right here. And then I'm going to be working into the front loops of every stitch all the way around from the last round we completed, and just weaving that right through. And then I'm just going to gently pull to close up that hole. And then I like to add a couple of knots by just going into a part of one of the stitches and creating a couple of knots. And then once it's all secured, I am going to weave this loose end right into the project. I'm just going to cut off this excess yarn and then just push that end through. And then we are nearly done, but I'm going to reattach my tapestry needle onto the head tail we left, and I'm going to show you guys how I like to secure up the head. So there's not a specific method to doing this that you have to follow, but I'll show you what I like to do. So I'm going to just start out by working into probably the last round of the head, so just that decrease round, and I'm just going to insert my needle into the first stitch that's closest to where the yarn is attached, and I'm going to work into, it's kind of the third loop of this front loop only round of the shell. So you see we have our top V, which is where you would usually work into if you were crocheting, but if you fold it down, you can see we have these third loops, and that is where I like to start out crocheting the head up. So I'm just going to put my needle right through there and kind of pull it through. You can see it just kind of makes the head closer to the shell. So I'm going to work into that next decrease stitch on the head, and then I'm going to be working into that next third loop on the shell. And then I just kind of pull it every time I've completed a stitch, and repeat that one more time. Then you can kind of look at your head. If it's a little lopsided like mine is, I like to go across a few more times just to make it super secure. So I'm going to go into a stitch that's one further from where we last worked. And then I'm actually just going to work back into the third loop only from the shell. So I'm not going to be working into a fourth third loop. I'm going to be working into the very same one, just so that the head's a little more like compact in those 3 stitches that we crocheted the head into. And then I'm just working back to the middle portion through both the head and the body each time. And then the final stitch, I'm just going to go a little further than that very first stitch we made and insert that yarn into the head, and then going into the third loop of the shell, the very first one we worked into, so not an additional one, the very first one that we worked into. And then pulling the needle all the way through that and securing it. So you can see our head is now centered. If you want to keep going for a little longer, you totally can, but this is good enough for me. So to finish this off, I'm going to weave the yarn through the head just to get to the underneath of the project, and then once I'm underneath the head, I am going to secure this strand of yarn with a couple of knots. And then once it's all secured, I'm going to weave it through the project to hide it. And then I'm just going to cut off the excess yarn and push that tail into the project. And this is going to be our completed turtle. It is so cute. You can kind of flatten out the arms and legs if you want to. They sometimes like to kind of curl, but I think that's just so cute. And yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and like the final result of your turtle. Make sure to let me know if you tried out this pattern and if you liked it, and let me know what color of turtle you made, because I love seeing all the different color combos you can do with these. And don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe to see more tutorials like this one. I have a whole bunch on the channel already, and this is also week 1 of our market prep tutorial series, so stay tuned for lots more tutorials coming very soon. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!